I've spent my career investigating body image, particularly within adolescence. My PhD, which I conducted at Trinity College Dublin, focused on how social media affects adolescent body image. And it also investigated whether self-compassion was a helpful approach for helping students navigate those self-critical thoughts that arise when we compare ourselves to others on social media. After this, and another area of my work, I was involved in the My World survey, which is the largest national survey of youth mental health in Ireland. And I was involved in analysing data of over 33,000 young people across Ireland. And we were interested in focusing on the risk and protective factors for body image and also disordered eating. And currently, as Eilis mentioned, I am working with the Irish Research Council. I'm funded by the Irish Research Council, and I work with Jigsaw, the National Centre of Youth Mental Health. I also work with the Be Real Foundation in the USA, which is a non-for-profit, which is designed to create resources to support body image in schools. And together we have created a new body image programme for students across Ireland. And I'll speak to that a little bit today. But in essence, tonight, I hope to draw together the knowledge that I've learned from these various research experiences to give you some kind of practical tools and suggestions to support a young person's body image and also eating disorders. So tonight, talk will take part in I will focus on two kind of areas. Firstly, we will look at body image and how you might support body image. And again, a lot of the themes for supporting body image are resonant for eating disorders, but I'll also move on to looking at eating disorders and how you might support someone with an eating disorder and look at some specific strategies related to that. And I'm aware that many of you may have different knowledge, understanding of body image and eating disorders. So tonight I'm just going to begin with some definitions to bring us all on the same page. So the first thing that I'd like to define is body image, which it's a multifaceted construct. It includes the thoughts that we have about our appearance, so whether we think that we're attractive or not. It also encompasses feelings. So this might be feeling pride in our appearance or shame. And it also relates to behaviors that relates to one's body image. So this might encompass checking one's appearance or reflection in mirrors and things like this. Eating disorders, then, on the other hand, are complex mental health conditions that can profoundly impact a person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and they can significantly impact someone's health and functioning. A question that I often get is, what is the difference between body image concerns, eating disorders, and disordered eating? And this is a great question. And often what we think about in this space is thinking about these behaviors along a spectrum, which we call the disordered eating spectrum. So at one end of the spectrum, we have eating disorders, and common ones include anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorders. So these are significant psychological conditions that often require medical treatment. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have things like body confidence or positive body image, or an absence of weight concerns, or engaging in mindful movement and exercise. And within the middle of this spectrum, we have things like compulsive eating or fasting or excessive exercising. And to some extent, we all engage in disordered behaviors from time to time. There may be times where we may overeat or undereat, and this is part of the spectrum. And again, experiences of body image are often fluid as well, so that they kind of can be ups and downs. But I suppose the thing that distinguishes an eating disorder from disordered eating or body image is related to the degree of severity, the degree and the severity of the experience. So for someone with anorexia or bulimia or an eating disorder, there's a complete preoccupation around food, body, and eating. There's often compulsive behaviors related to food, body, and eating. It causes profound distress and impaired functioning to daily life. And again, it's persistent. It's something that occurs again and again. And another way of thinking of this, and what one of my colleagues, Denise Hamburger, shares, and I think this is a really nice illustration of it, is this kind of idea of a mind share continuum. So that all of us, to some extent, think about food, body, and eating. But for someone with an eating disorder, their whole 100% of their mindset is often taken up by these thoughts or these preoccupations with food, body, and eating. And then at the other end of the spectrum, people's thoughts are taken up by other things apart from food, body, and eating. And I suppose the focus of my research and my work is to try and shift people towards this kind of area where less space is given towards these thoughts related to food, body, and eating, and an individual can enjoy and experience other paths of their life and focus on these. And so a lot of my work focuses on this prevention side. So we know that, let's say, body image is a key risk factor and it often maintains eating disorders. And so what my research and work focuses on is that kind of prevention piece. How do we support someone's body image so that they don't experience an eating disorder? I would caveat that the eating disorders are very complex and there are multiple different causes for eating disorders. And I will touch on some of those later on tonight. And that the second part of the talk around supporting eating disorders is looking at kind of how you might support someone going through treatment and recovery. But the first part of tonight is looking at body image and kind of prevention. But before I get into that, I suppose I want to set the scene or the context and drawing on this mindshare continuum and where we all fall somewhere on this preoccupation with food, body, and eating. I'd like to encourage you now to reflect in your own lives about how often appearance, diet, or exercise come up in your daily conversations or in your own news feeds or in your own media consumption. I suppose the answer for many of us is quite a lot. And I like to think of it in terms of this analogy of a fishbowl, and that in our society, we live in a very appearance-centric society where we are infiltrated with images from magazines, media, social media, telling us what we should look like and what are societal ideals. We're bombarded with images of what I should eat in a day or these kind of before and after body transformations. We see it in our kind of behaviors in terms of selfie taking and also the comments and the feedback and the validation for this that is often seen online. And so we're really swimming in, I suppose, a fishbowl that has become more and more diluted or polluted with these images of aesthetics and appearance that can drive these body image concerns and that we see. And so I suppose this is the context of the world in which we live, and that body image has become increasingly an important topic to understand, to study, and to be able to support across all ages. I suppose tonight I'm going to focus on adolescence and childhood as kind of the focus, but it's important to note that body image impacts people across different age groups and across the lifespan. But just for the purposes of tonight, because the audience is predominantly parents, we're going to be focusing in on the younger age groups. And given the appearance-centric society that we live in, I suppose it's no surprise that body image is a key concern for teenagers. So in a survey done with teenagers in Ireland in 2012, body image was reported as the #1 factor that was impacting the mental health of young people, second only to exam stress. About 77% of adolescents globally report body image distress. So this is preoccupation or dissatisfaction with appearance. And less than half of adolescents in Ireland were satisfied with their appearance, according to the 2019 My World survey, again, the largest national survey of youth mental health in Ireland. So we can see that body image is a key issue for young people. And I suppose when we think about body image, it can be experienced both positively and negatively. A lot of the research is focused traditionally on this element of negative body image. This is often experienced as a discrepancy between how one thinks one should look and one actually looks. And so what this looks like in a person is someone who is constantly thinking about their own appearance and engaging in those kind of comparative evaluations where they might feel that they don't match up with their ideals. They're often worried about their weight and shape. And importantly, they can miss cues to self-care. And this is problematic because, again, these kind of missing self-cues to self-care can impact health. So we know that body dissatisfaction is one of the key risk factors for eating disorders. We also know that it's linked with reduced health behaviors, low self-esteem, and negative affect. And it can even impact academic performance. So again, there are no benefits to body dissatisfaction. And so trying to understand ways that we can reduce the sense of dissatisfaction and promote a healthy body image is really important. At this point, I would just like to acknowledge that sometimes there's a misconception that body image is a female-only issue. And again, we have increasingly recognized that body image impacts people across the gender spectrum. For example, we've seen a rise in male eating disorders over the last 2 decades, but yet it still remains quite a stigmatized and hidden issue among men and boys. And this can be problematic in that it might prevent help seeking or recognition of these problems in boys and men. So again, it's important to recognize that body image can affect people across the gender spectrum. In terms of what we are hoping to achieve in terms of supporting body image, we're trying to create this sense of positive body image, which is a distinct experience than negative body image. A person with positive body image can accept and respect their body, even if it doesn't match societal ideals. They can focus on their assets rather than their imperfections. Often it's misconstrued as this kind of love yourself mentality. And while that's an ideal to strive for, often loving ourselves can be quite a challenge for someone who struggled with body image for quite a while. So in essence, what positive body image or body confidence looks like is an ability to be able to appreciate what your body can do and feel comfortable in your body. And importantly, be able to engage in behaviors that nourish and take care of the body. And again, we know that there are a huge amount of benefits associated with this positive body image, and that it's linked with these self-care behaviors. It's linked with reduced eating disorder risk, but it's also linked with healthy eating, exercise enjoyment, even being less impacted by the appearance-focused content in social media. So we know that kind of fostering this sense of positive body image is important. And I'm going to speak through some ways that you can do this in a minute. But often I get the question from parents is, when is the right time to support my child with their body image? And what I would highlight is that actually these body image concerns begin to emerge quite young, younger than we might expect or anticipate. So this is a really interesting study that was conducted by Susan Paxton in 2012 and Spiel and colleagues. And what they did is they gave 3 and 5-year-olds this image that you see on the left. And they asked certain prompts of children following viewing this image. They asked them, who would you invite to your birthday party? Who would you not invite? Who has the most friends, or who do you think has the least friends? And they asked the child to pick a silhouette here to reflect those questions. What do you think happened? And I suppose the unfortunate thing is that as young as 3 and 5, children were selecting the children on my left-hand side of the screen as being the people that they would invite to their birthday party, and the people in the right-hand side of the screen on my right as being not invited or having the least amount of friends. And so this is an implicit weight bias, this idea that there are certain societal standards that we have in society that I suppose marginalize some bodies and celebrate others, and that this is evident as young as 3 and 5 years of age. And we see that around 6 years of age, children start to engage in those evaluative pieces where they're comparing their appearance or other dimensions of their identity to other people. But again, by 40%, by 5 to 9 years of age, 40% of girls want to be thinner, and half of girls aged 5 to 6 worried at least sometimes about being fat. So again, I suppose the message is here that ideas around body image really start early, and that as a parent, trying to acknowledge and recognize that these issues can start early and being able to address them as early as possible is something that can be helpful. And I suppose now I'm going to move on to looking at how you can help your child build body confidence. And again, a lot of this is relevant across different age groups as well. And so, yeah, I'll talk through some of these kind of practical tips and advice. So one of the first pieces of advice that I would give in terms of supporting body image is trying to shift a focus away from appearance. So we live in a very appearance-focused society, and often our conversations can unintentionally revolve around appearance or body image in a way that can reinforce the pursuit of body ideals or create body image pressures. So comments like, oh, I look fat in this. Again, people who engage in this kind of negative self-talk about their appearance often tend to exhibit more negative body image. So as a parent, being conscious of the language that you use around appearance, and again, focusing on this can be quite helpful in terms of trying to shift how your child might think and also what they might model. Again, children are like sponges, so they often pick up on the connotations that come with the language and the way that we discuss appearance. Another way that we see these kind of reinforcement of image and appearance is through even compliments. So these are often well-intentioned compliments, but they can have unintended consequences. So things like, you look great, have you lost weight? Again, this reinforces the idea that you have to lose weight to look good. And again, other comments like I was bad today, I had a cookie at lunch, or that I had to work off my dinner to buy or a treat or whatever it is, implying that we need to earn our food or earn nourishment. And it attaches a morality to this kind of aspect. So I suppose in terms of supporting your young person and supporting body image, a thing that can be helpful is trying to avoid commenting on your own appearance and that of the child. And in particular, if you can shift the conversation towards focusing on other attributes that you value, such as their personality or hard work or these kinds of things, as opposed to appearance. And another way that we can shift this dialogue is away from focusing on what the body looks like and more on focusing on what it can do for us. And this concept is called body functionality. There's a compelling amount of evidence that suggests that body functionality and kind of reframing in terms of thinking about the function of our bodies can be a powerful tool in terms of building positive body image. So again, it's encouraging us to focus on all of the things that our body does for us. And again, it does a lot more for us than just being an aesthetic. So it helps us walk or bike to school. It helps us digest food and heal from a cold. It helps us dance and sing and do all the things in life that we enjoy. So again, focusing in on that sense of what our bodies can do as opposed to what they look, an instrument rather than an ornament. This can be a way that you can shift the conversation or reframe it and support body image. Another way that we can promote body image is through shifting away from this sense of judgment. And again, we do live in a society where there is a lot of judgment attached to appearance, as some bodies are marginalized, some bodies are celebrated. And often there's a concept or an idea in our society that if you point out someone's flaws or shame them, or these kinds of shame someone for their appearance, that it will make them change. So if you tell someone that they're overweight, then, or make them feel bad about this, then it will motivate a health behavior. And actually, we know from the research that experiencing body dissatisfaction is not helpful in terms of in motivating health behaviors. And it can actually have counterproductive effects. For example, it's not someone who's engaging in health behaviors from the motivation of body dissatisfaction may not be engaging with self-care motives behind the behavior. And so this can lead to kind of more unsustainable or unhealthful behaviors in terms of trying to shift how our bodies look like. And again, there's also, this is compounded by another cultural myth that we could all attain body standards if we just work hard enough. But the reality is that 95% of diets fail. And this is because when we engage in this kind of level of restriction, when we restrict the energy consumption, our bodies think that we're going into starvation mode and they try and protect us. So, for example, our metabolism slows down, or we start to crave high energy foods. We start to retain weight because our body thinks that it's starving. And so this is why these kinds of diets tend to fail. And it's not due to a lack of willpower or self-control. It's actually our biology. We are biologically constrained by how much we can actually change our physical bodies. And also, there's kind of this mismatch between research and consumer culture. So our culture leads us to believe that we have complete control over our bodies and that just controlling our exercise or our food, we can completely control our bodies. But actually, the reality is we have far less control over our bodies than culture leads us to believe. For example, 50 to 90% of our body size and shape is actually determined by genetics. And there are many other factors such as age and stages of life and our genetic set points that influence our shape and size, and that are not within our control. So again, these are just important things to be aware of, and that it reduces that level of blame and shame that often people experience when it comes to body image. So what we can do instead, I suppose, is celebrate the fact that we are diverse as humans and accept that we do come in different shapes and sizes. And this is a good thing, and that this reduces the pressure to fit into a very narrow window of a body ideal that is celebrated in society. And again, this reduces the pressures to look a certain way and be a certain size. And what is often helpful is to move that focus away from these metrics that we often attach to appearance, things like BMI, calorie counting, size of clothing, instead focus in on the kind of behaviors that might support and nourish our bodies. Things like listening to our bodies, engaging in behaviors or movements that is enjoyable and that kind of nourish us and make us feel happy. These are kind of ways in which we can shift the focus away from those kind of these narrow focuses and kind of, I suppose, take care of our bodies in different ways. The third way that we can try and encourage positive body image is through this concept of self-compassion. So self-compassion is considered to be an emotional regulation strategy that allows us to self-soothe in times of difficulty and distress. And in essence, self-compassion provides that mindset shift as to how we can accept our bodies, because it, I suppose, highlights that we're not all perfect, that we are flawed, and that's part of being a human, and that's okay. And crucially, self-compassion targets that self-criticism and shame that often underlies eating pathology and body image concerns. And we know from the research that there's a huge amount of evidence to support higher levels of self-compassion being associated with lower levels of eating pathology, body image concerns. And we know that kind of self-compassion programs that teach this kind of concept to people can be helpful, and it can be helpful for teenagers as well. And I suppose the reason why self-compassion is helpful is that often we default to being critical. Our default mindset, I suppose, is that of an inner critic. And often we can say harsh and critical things to ourselves in ways that we would never say to another person. So, for example, you would never say to your best friend, gosh, you're so ugly, or you've really let yourself go. But often we can say these things to ourselves. And so the inner critic can be quite active when we think about body image and body dissatisfaction. This is some research that I conducted with teenagers in Ireland. And again, it highlights the level of self-criticism that was experienced by young people, particularly in relation to their appearance. So one student said, if I don't suit a certain body standard, then I don't know, I don't think my body is good enough. Or even knowing for a fact that what they see on social media is not real life. They know it's heavily edited, but they still try to live up to the standards. It's unachievable. I know it, yet I still fall for it. So again, there's a lot of this kind of comparison piece that is driving concerns, particularly when we think about social media. And that often what arises from this is this kind of self-critical dialogue. And what self-compassion does is it tries to reframe that kind of thought process, and it tries to disrupt those negative thought spirals. And what often can happen when we engage in those negative thought spirals is that one thought spirals into a more negative thought, which spirals into a more negative thought. So an example might be that initially a thought might be, why does nobody like my photo? And this spirals into, nobody likes me, which spirals then into, I'm not good enough. Or I don't like how I look in that photo, which spirals into, I hate how I look, and then thinking I'm a failure. So one way that self-compassion can help stop this spiral, and this is something that you might be able to help your young person through, is first of all, bringing their awareness to the fact that maybe their thoughts are spiraling, that this might be an inner critic, and focusing in on what the feelings are that underlie this spiral. Encouraging your child to recognize that they're not alone, that everyone experiences these feelings from time to time. Taking some deep breaths. Again, this kind of calms the anxiety that often arises when that negative self-talk emerges. And trying to encourage your young person to recognize that these spiraled thoughts are not facts, that these are just the negative thought spirals that are occurring, and encouraging them to think about what they might say to a friend if they were in the same situation. And can they say that to themselves? So some examples of what that might look like in terms of reframing the inner critic in terms of a self-compassionate voice is saying things like, you're doing the best you can, or you are enough, you are worthy as you are. Or I know that you're uncomfortable right now. That's okay. We all struggle with these things right now, and I'm here to listen. Or even reframing it back to that kind of functionality piece that I mentioned earlier, that your body does so much more for you than just how it looks. So I suppose pulling all of these together, it can be helpful to role model this positive body image through three kind of focuses. One of them is shifting this focus away from appearance and then focusing on what our bodies can do. So again, trying to reduce the amount of a language and commentary around appearance and focus inwards. Another way that we can do this is through less judgment and encourage compassion for others and celebrate that diversity. And another way is through encouraging self-kindness. And again, as a parent, it can be helpful to, if you can, to pull these kind of elements together yourself and role model this for a young person. And I know it can be a challenge, particularly if you yourself have struggled with body image. But I think through kind of this element of self-compassion and kind of shifting focus away from appearance, these are kind of steps that can help in terms of supporting young people's body image. I'm going to briefly highlight that a lot of my work has pulled together these different elements of supporting positive body image into a program that we are running with Jigsaw within schools across Ireland. And this is the Be Real's Body Count program. And again, this program is 4 lessons. It's a training resource for teachers that kind of seeks to cultivate these skills in self-awareness, emotional regulation, compassion to promote positive body image and decrease body dissatisfaction and self-criticism. But again, these are concepts that you can engage with as a parent to support your young person as well. So now I suppose I've spent a bit of time talking about body image, and I want to move on to eating disorders. And again, as we discussed earlier, these are very complex mental health conditions requiring medical assistance and treatment, and they can profoundly impact thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and health and functioning. And we're going to look at that now. I suppose in terms of some statistics related to eating disorders in Ireland, so we know that eating disorders have a lifetime prevalence of approximately 5% of the population in Ireland. So this means that the proportion of a population at some point who has had this characteristic ever. So 5%, we would actually, that looks quite high. And also we know globally, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a sharp increase in eating disorders. There was a doubling of eating disorders globally during the pandemic. And here in Ireland, we saw similar increases. So we saw a 66% increase in acute hospital admissions among young adolescent girls for eating disorders between 2019 and 2020. So again, eating disorders are relatively common, and they are very serious conditions that warrant attention. But I often think that eating disorders are often misunderstood. And so I'm going to talk through some of the kind of factors that need to be understood as a parent. If you suspect that your child might be struggling with an eating disorder, these are really important things to understand. So one of the things is that with eating disorders, appearances can be deceptive. Often we think, or we have a stereotype in our head of what a person might look like if they have an eating disorder. But the reality is that many people who have an eating disorder may look healthy, but may be extremely ill. So often it's a lot of eating disorder can be founded and focused in on the mind, and it might necessarily reflect on the outside. So it's very difficult to tell just by looking at someone whether or not they have an eating disorder. Really, it's important to understand the thought processes and the feelings that underlie people's behaviors and experiences. Another thing with eating disorders is that they do not discriminate. Like body image, eating disorders can affect people of all ages, genders, ethnicities, sexual orientations, body shape and size, abilities, socioeconomic status, and walks of life. They can affect anyone. Unfortunately, there remains a lot of stigma around eating disorders in groups such as men, and this may prevent help seeking in this regard. So again, just being aware as a parent that it can affect people across various different ages, genders, and this is something to be aware of. Another thing that's really important to understand is that eating disorders are not a choice, nor are they a phase. They're not something that someone wakes up one day and decides, I want an eating disorder, and it's not something that just goes away with like developments. This is often something that people have to work through a recovery process to recover from. And these are serious and biologically influenced health conditions that can disrupt personal life, but also family unit functioning. Also, it's important to note that families are not to blame. So you are not a bad parent because your child has an eating disorder. Again, eating disorders are highly complex. disorders, and they are caused by a range of different factors. Often it's thought to be a kind of a combination or an interaction between biological factors like genetics, psychological factors like personality or self-esteem, and social factors, so societal pressures, and also even kind of life events, stressful circumstances, abuse, these kinds of things. And often families can be the best allies in the recovery process. So that's really important to be aware of. And I'm going to talk about how you, as a parent or family member, may be able to support a young person who, if you suspect they have an eating disorder, if they have an eating disorder. And I'll talk through that in a minute. Also, what's important to understand is that eating disorders are not just about food and eating, although often those are the symptoms that we can recognize, or this is often the way it manifests. Eating disorders, as I mentioned, they are multifaceted. And as I mentioned, body image is one of the factors that is a risk factor for eating disorders, but there are many. When we think about eating disorders, they are often described as maladaptive coping strategies. So initially, they provided a sense of security or comfort or control, but slowly they quite quickly then tend to lead to difficult patterns that can be hard to break. So this is how an eating disorder manifests. So thinking of it as a maladaptive coping strategy, and that it had initially provided that sense of control, but then it manifests as something that takes over, and it's something that becomes distressing to the individual. I'd also emphasize that full recovery is possible. So changing one's thoughts and behaviors related to appearance and in an eating disorder context can be really challenging. But it is important to remember that full recovery is possible, and early detection and treatment are important. And I'll talk about maybe how you might detect or recognize some signs and symptoms, and also some pathways towards treatment. But before I touch on that, I'm going to talk about the causes of eating disorder. And again, there's no single cause. Often it's a coming together of various risk factors. And some people describe that there's a particular event that happened, and after which they recognize that the eating disorder manifested. For others, that's not the case, and that these are just a range of different factors that come together to influence the disorder. So some of these are internal, like genetics, personality, body dissatisfaction. Some are external, so these are societal pressures, stressful events, etc. The three most common eating disorders are anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. There are a range of other types of disorders, but again, these three disorders are characterized by that kind of being a maladaptive coping mechanism, that somewhere this disorder provided a sense of comfort, and that these kind of patterns have broken down and it becomes something that is unhelpful. And again, if you wanted to learn more about these specific disorders, I'd encourage you to check out the BodyWise website, which goes into detail about these. Again, I'm conscious we're short on time tonight, but I suppose I wanted to highlight that there are various different types of disorder. There are various different signs and symptoms for each of these different types of eating disorder. But some of the symptoms you may notice relate to behavioral, emotional, psychological, and physical. So behavioral might be that a young person is focused on weight. They may avoid eating socially, engage in secretive eating. In terms of emotional factors, they may fear weight gain, and they may have low mood or self-esteem. And in terms of physical, often it manifests in terms of changes to body weight up and down, or stomach pain, or feeling cold, tired, and dizzy. So these are some of the factors. This is not an exhaustive list, and spunout.ie has some really good resources that explain these kind of symptoms. I suppose in terms of getting help for a young person who's experiencing a disorder, in Ireland, there are two main treatment pathways. One is the public route, which starts with a visit to the GP and who can refer to further services. And there's also a private route. So this involves treatment outside of the public system. And again, BodyWise outlines these in great detail, and I encourage you to check this out if this is something that you think would be helpful. What I would like to highlight to parents and family members is that recovery from an eating disorder involves not relying on the eating disorder to feel safe and secure. So this can be something that can be very difficult to break. It can be a gradual, non-linear process, and that setbacks are really common, and it's normal. It's part of the recovery process. And what I would encourage, if someone is experiencing what they perceive as a setback, that encourage that person to recognize that this is part of the process. Recovery is a learning process. It involves a bit of trial and error to find what works. Again, treatment might look very different for different people. And so there's not one size fits all. But in terms of this recovery process, you're not back at square one if you think you've experienced a setback. You've learned from what has worked before, and maybe you can draw on that to bring yourself back on that journey. So I'm briefly going to talk through some things that can be helpful in terms of supporting eating disorders. I'm conscious that I'm running out of time. But one of the things is that can be so profoundly helpful is offering an empathetic and listening ear. So this is creating a safe space for your child to discuss their concerns. And even if they don't actually open up to you, having that knowledge that someone is there to listen, that they're not alone, can be really helpful, because eating disorders can be so isolating. What's really important, and I know as a parent, there's the tendency to want to fix the problem for your child and make their pain and their suffering go away. But as an empathetic listener, it's trying to listen to their concerns without judgment and trying to not jump in and fix the problem, but actually listen. So what empathetic listening looks like is saying things like, I'm here, or what did that make you feel? Or can you tell me more about? Versus kind of jumping in and saying, well, have you tried X, Y, and Z? Or you should, or oh, don't be upset, you'll be fine, or dismissing it. So again, empathetic listening is trying to be open and open those channels of dialogue. It can also be helpful to focus on the feelings. So again, often the tendency is to focus on the behaviors, but in reality, eating disorders start in the mind. So again, trying to avoid that commentary on foods and specifics of food and appearance, and instead ask about feelings, because that underpins a lot of these behaviors. An eating disorder voice is a characteristic of the eating disorder. It's negative self-talk that often is part of the disorder. So you might hear it in terms of a person talking about shoulds, or they must, or they have to. And the eating disorder voice, again, it's trying to maintain that eating disorder. It creates these rules. And initially, it provided a sense of security and comfort. But in time, it creates a sense of helplessness, and the person becomes or loses their confidence. And so what's important is to recognize this is an element of eating disorders, and that separating the person from their disorder can be a way that you can support an individual who's experiencing an eating disorder. So recognizing that a person is not their disorder and trying to appeal maybe to their logical side of their mind and fighting that eating disorder voice. And for more Bodywise, really great resources on this. The final thing that I would say is practicing self-compassion as a parent. So trying to support a young person or your child who has an eating disorder is really challenging and a stressful experience. And just try to remember you're doing the best you can, and try to be compassionate with yourself. A lot of your focus may be on your young person, but again, trying to make time to look after yourself, or open up with a friend or a family member, or giving yourself compassion in this different time. Like the analogy of putting on your own air mask before helping others in an airplane. This can help in terms of your capacity to mind yourself, but also support your young person. So I suppose bringing it together in terms of supporting someone with an eating disorder, it's offering an empathetic ear, listening without judgment, focusing on the feelings as opposed to the behaviors, separating the person from their disorder, and practicing self-care and compassion as a parent. I'm going to link some resources here as to how you might get help for body image and eating disorders. And then if you'd like to hear more about me or my research, there is a link here and a QR code. But thank you so much for listening, and I encourage you to take any questions, or to ask questions that I will take. And I'd like to thank you so much for your time and attention here tonight.
Ciara, thank you so much for that absolutely fantastic talk. There was so much information there that I hope is of great use to our very large number of attendees. I might choose, we've quite a few questions. We're not going to have time to answer them all, so I'm just going to choose a few that I think may represent the kind of questions that are foremost in the minds of many people. So I'm actually going to start with one of the questions that came in last, but I think it's a generic one that lots of people might find helpful if you answered. It's, can you recommend a powerful video, book, social media handle, influencer, etc., to show to a young person to try to prevent or to show when they may be at a vulnerable stage? So resources, really, I suppose, for those struggling with body image.
So that's a fantastic question. And on this slide that I have on the screen, there are some really great resources. So I'd encourage, in terms of body image, the body image Embrace Collective has some fantastic resources that can be accessible for young people, parents, and teachers, as does the Be Real Foundation in the USA and our own Youth Mental Health Lab as well. In terms of kind of books, again, one of my colleagues, Dr. Zali Yeager, has written an excellent book in terms of parents and supporting body image. It's, again, Embrace Kids. And there's a really powerful film that comes with that, that is, again, I think available on Netflix or coming to Netflix in Ireland in the near future. And again, there's so many great accounts in terms of supporting body image. So I know that there's often the portrayal that social media is all bad, and that's not necessarily the case when it comes to body image, and that it's offered these kind of accounts that can be helpful in supporting body image. I do know in the Irish context, for example, that Rosanna Purcell has great kind of podcasts and posts a lot in terms of supporting body image, as does the Food Medic in the UK. So these are accounts that, again, might be helpful in terms of supporting body image. And also, again, the Embrace Collective have resources and link to other resources or other influencers they've kind of within their page as well. So these are some of the kind of body image resources. And again, of course, with eating disorders, Jigsaw have some great resources in terms of their Ask Jigsaw, as does Bodywise. They have a range of different resources. They also host a podcast as well. So there are lots of different resources that I've kind of touched on, and hopefully that one of those might resonate with the young person you're trying to support.
Thanks, Ciara. That's a great list of different resources there. There's one question here that I think I'll put to you, which is, I can see that someone has interpreted maybe what you're saying is that we should be throwing out BMI and calorie intake, and concludes saying you can't simply eat everything. You need to encourage healthy eating habits. But I'm assuming that you're not in any way saying healthy eating shouldn't be encouraged. And
absolutely not.
On that. Yeah,
that's a great question, and I suppose a really important part of building a positive body image and is kind of engaging in that kind of behavior that nourishes our body. That includes eating mindfully, engaging in activities and exercise that supports our bodies. And I think sometimes the focus on the metrics can often detract from that focus on health. Often people get wrapped up in the metrics, and that's why we're saying focus internally on the kind of, again, our bodies are very intuitive, and it's trying to tune into what our bodies are saying and telling us in terms of eating a balanced kind of and getting various nourishment and nutrition. And I suppose it's just shifting the focus away from numbers as opposed to behaviors or the process. I'm not saying that we shouldn't focus on health. That's a really important, that's the core facet of body image, is that if we have positive body image, we're more likely to take care of ourselves in ways that support our health. And so that's, I suppose, why I'm kind of shifting that focus and just thinking about that element as opposed to BMI and calorie counting, which can often have unintended and unhelpful consequences in terms of managing health, and can often have so that's
that's really helpful, and I hope that's helpful to everybody listening. Another one here, I've often found that though I speak positively about my daughters, saying things like "you look beautiful" or "that's very pretty," she would respond negatively with "no, I'm not, and you're not beautiful enough to be my friend." When would you consider a child's response worrying? And if the positive body talk has no impact or reinforcement on the child's self-talk, is that something that you think you'd be concerned about?
So sorry, Eilis, the question was.
So I'm guessing it's a parent who's, or well, it is a parent, because this parent is saying that they speak positively to their daughters, saying "you look beautiful" or "that's very pretty," and the daughter responds "no, I'm not." So sort of, I suppose, is that something that you would be concerned about, or what would you suggest could be done to reinforce and develop a positive body image?
So I think body image is influenced by a variety of different sources. So you might be giving her input as a parent, but she might be picking up, or they might be picking up on different messages about their appearance from society, etc. And they may be forming their own kind of concept that, again, they might be jarring with yours or kind of contradicting what you're saying. At this point, I would actually have a curiosity about what the child is saying. So if they're coming to you and saying, no, I'm not pretty, maybe try and understand where that's coming from. What is actually the source of that the kind of the thought process underpinning where they're coming from. And maybe you can kind of bring those ideas that, you know, we're all different and that there are different elements that are beautiful in everyone, and trying to focus on those kind of elements and not dismissing that their own thoughts and feelings. I mean, again, I think it's important to acknowledge that maybe she may not, or they may not feel happy in their appearance, and maybe understanding where that's coming from, and is there a way that you can work towards building something that's more positive, and or kind of coming to that acceptance and appreciation. And I think it's great that you're reinforcing that you kind of love your child, and I think the key thing is that it's acceptance regardless of what they look like. And I think that's a really important message to get through, and that you love them no matter if their body changes, and that you love them more than just what they look like, that there are many different qualities that you value, and it's not just their appearance, and that their appearance, your love is not conditional on their appearance as well. So I think for that case, I think it's trying to understand where the behaviors are coming from, or the thoughts patterns. And maybe I would refer you to the resource that I alluded to, Embrace Kids. This is a parenting resource that, again, kind of goes through these scenarios in detail, and you may be able to find some kind of guidance there that might be helpful.
Thanks, Ciara. So Ciara, we're into the last few minutes. So if I could ask you if you wouldn't mind putting up the yes, exactly, the QR code again. Now, so my apologies. I think one of the links that was that I put into the chat may not have worked, but hopefully this QR code will work. If you can't get the QR code working, you can email me. So you should have my email address. I'm eilis.hennessy@ucd.ie, and my email will have been in all the invitations that you received with the Zoom link for the webinar this evening. So just to remind you that this is a study that we are doing. What we're trying to understand is in what circumstances do young people believe that it is important for another young person to get help for a mental health problem? And so we're looking for parents to give permission for a child to take part. And if you follow this QR code or the link, you'll find more information about our study. And if you are willing to allow your child to take part, you can then either show them the QR code or forward the link to them with a request that they take part. And we'd be very grateful if you would do that. So it just remains now for me to thank Ciara so much for a really fantastic talk this evening. I think you'll see in the chat that we have put information into there about talks that we have next week. So next week, I'm going to be talking about positive parenting to support young people's well-being. And the week after, my colleague, Dr. Paul Dalton is going to be talking about worry and anxiety, and particularly where it interferes with young people's sleep patterns. So just we'll finish up there, and I'll just thank you all very much for your attention this evening. We had a huge response to this webinar, and well over 300 people in the webinar throughout Ciara's talk. So thank you very much, and we hope to see many of you again next week.